A team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
When the first humans arrived and settled in North America is a question that has intrigued scientists for centuries. While the debate continues to this day, a recent discovery inside the dry caves of southern Oregon has suddenly brought new evidence to light. Deep inside those caves, researchers discovered ancient human DNA. And when they analyzed it, the results pushed back the timeline of human settlement in the Americas by thousands of years beyond what many of us were taught in school. But the most convincing part is, it wasn't just one discovery. In total, there are 6 major archaeological discoveries that all point in the same direction. So what exactly are those discoveries? And are scientists finally getting close to rewriting the history of the first Americans? Before we get to that, let's start with the textbook version of the story. The story everyone believed. For most of the 20th century, the story of the first Americans seemed completely settled. According to that story, the first people arrived in North America about 13,000 years ago. They crossed from Siberia into Alaska, over a land bridge called Beringia, which emerged when lower sea levels exposed the sea floor during the last ice age. And from there, they followed a route through the massive ice sheets into the rest of the continent. To archaeologists, the timing seemed almost perfect. Around 13,000 years ago, the route opened, and people entered the continent. Case closed. And if we talk about the one piece of evidence that seemed to prove this story, it came from a discovery made near Clovis, New Mexico, in 1929. There, archaeologists uncovered distinctive stone spear points lying alongside the bones of Ice Age mammoths. What made the points so unique was a long groove carved into the base called a flute. It allowed the stone point to fit securely into a wooden spear shaft and helped absorb the force of impact when it struck a massive animal. In some cases, those spear points were even found embedded in mammoth ribs, pointing to the incredible hunting skills of the people who used them. Now, after dating the organic remains found alongside those tools, scientists concluded they had lived around 13,000 years ago. Since the discovery came from near the town of Clovis, that ancient culture became known as the Clovis people. And just like that, they became the official first Americans. Nearly every major textbook, museum, and documentary presented the same timeline. Generations grew up looking at the same image of fur-covered hunters surrounding mammoths in the snow. Challenging this Clovis first model wasn't just disagreeing with a popular idea. For many archaeologists, it meant questioning the foundation of American archaeology itself, something that could cost funding, damage reputations, and even put academic careers at risk. For nearly 8 decades, that accepted timeline remained almost untouched. Then, in 2010, inside a dry cave in southern Oregon, archaeologists discovered something unexpected. Evidence that didn't come from stone or bone, but from something far more personal, ancient human DNA. The oldest DNA clue. Those dry caves in southern Oregon are known as the Paisley Caves. But before we get to the discovery that shocked scientists in 2010, we need to go back almost 70 years earlier. In 1938, while digging in Paisley Cave number 3, archaeologist Luther Cressman uncovered obsidian tools, charcoal, and bones from Ice Age animals, including extinct camels and horses, all buried in the same deep layer. To Cressman, the evidence suggested something extraordinary. Humans had been living alongside Ice Age animals in Oregon. But because his claims challenged the growing belief of the Clovis people, Cressman faced intense resistance. Some of the most influential archaeologists of the era, including Alish Hrdlicka of the Smithsonian Institution, utterly humiliated him. They even attacked his methods and argued that animals burrowing through the soil could have mixed the artifacts and bones together over time. Without the technology needed to prove his claims, Cressman's findings were dismissed, and Paisley Caves was largely forgotten by mainstream archaeology for decades. Then, in 2010, a new team from the University of Oregon returned to the site with technology Cressman never had. They dug deeper into the dry desert soil beneath layers of volcanic ash, where earlier researchers had stopped searching. And what they uncovered was not a weapon or a stone tool. It was something far more unusual. They found coprolites, ancient human feces preserved for thousands of years. Normally, something like this would disappear quickly, but Paisley Caves had a rare advantage. The Oregon desert was extremely dry, preventing moisture from breaking down organic material. What would have rotted away almost anywhere else survived, like a message locked in time. And that message contained something archaeologists had never expected: human DNA. Coprolites were especially valuable because they could not easily be moved around by natural forces. A stone tool can shift through layers of dirt over thousands of years, but human waste stays where it was left behind. It was a direct biological record of someone who had actually lived there. When geneticist Eske Willerslev and his team analyzed the samples, they found DNA belonging to haplogroups A2 and B2, two founding genetic lineages shared by indigenous peoples of the Americas today. And then came the moment that changed everything. Using AMS radiocarbon dating, researchers determined that the samples were around 14,300 years old. That meant people were living in Oregon at least 1,000 years before the Clovis timeline. For the first time, the challenge to Clovis was not based on a questionable stone fragment or a disputed artifact. It came from the remains of the people themselves. But the strangest part is that Paisley Caves was not the first warning sign. Decades before Oregon's DNA discovery, another site had already delivered a discovery that shook the foundation of American archaeology. And this time, it wasn't just a matter of pushing the timeline back by 1,000 years, it went thousands of years further than that. The evidence. Before Oregon. If we travel nearly 2,500 miles east from Oregon, we arrive in western Pennsylvania. There, beneath a huge sandstone rock overhang, is a place called Meadowcroft Rock Shelter. Thousands of years ago, it offered everything early people needed: shelter from the weather, fresh water from nearby Cross Creek, and easy access to the rich Ohio River Valley. It was exactly the kind of place hunter-gatherers would return to again and again. The story began in 1955 when a local historian named Albert Miller noticed a groundhog hole on his property. Curious, he reached inside and pulled out a finely made stone tool along with burned animal bones. He immediately realized they didn't belong near the surface. Instead of announcing the discovery, Miller kept it quiet for almost 20 years, worried that careless digging or looters would destroy the site before it could be properly studied. Then, in 1973, he invited archaeologist Dr. James Adovasio from the University of Pittsburgh to excavate it. Adovasio understood exactly what was at stake. If the site turned out to be older than Clovis, every detail would be questioned. So his team excavated with extraordinary care, sometimes removing soil just millimeters at a time and carefully mapping every layer to make sure nothing had been disturbed. What they uncovered was impossible to ignore. Deep inside the shelter were ancient fire hearths, charcoal, stone tools, and a small spear point unlike anything found at Clovis. When pieces of charcoal from those ancient campfires were radiocarbon dated, the results came back at roughly 19,000 to nearly 20,000 years old. That meant people had been living in Pennsylvania thousands of years before the Clovis culture, while massive glaciers still covered much of northern North America. And the reaction was immediate. Critics claimed the samples had been contaminated by ancient coal or groundwater. Others dismissed the dates as physically impossible. Some even accused Adovasio's team of disturbing the soil layers during excavation, which, they said, made the evidence unreliable. Over time, archaeologists gave this resistance a name: Clovis primacy syndrome, the tendency to judge any evidence older than Clovis by far harsher standards than everything else. But the Meadowcroft discovery wasn't that easy to dismiss. It wasn't built on a single stone tool or one questionable sample. Archaeologists uncovered ancient fireplaces, carefully made tools, animal bones, plant remains, and other traces of everyday life. It looked less like a mystery and more like a real Ice Age campsite. Still, the debate never truly ended. Critics always had one last argument. Maybe the dating itself was wrong. And that question lingered for years, until another discovery in Oregon removed that argument almost completely. The timeline written in ash. About 70 miles from the Paisley Caves, near the small town of Riley, sits Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. In 2011, archaeologist Dr. Patrick O'Grady and his team from the University of Oregon began excavating the site. At first, there was nothing extraordinary, just a few obsidian flakes and a worn stone tool near the entrance. Then they reached something far more important than the artifacts themselves: a thick layer of white volcanic ash. Scientists identified it as ash from a massive Mount St. Helens eruption that happened roughly 15,400 to 15,600 years ago. That ash acted like a natural timestamp. Anything buried beneath it had to be older than the eruption. There was no arguing with the order of the layers. And beneath that ash, the discoveries began. The team recovered 27 fragments of tooth enamel, including teeth from an extinct Ice Age camel and an ancient ancestor of today's American bison. Then they found a carefully shaped stone tool made from orange agate. It had several working edges, one for cutting, another for scraping, and another worn into tiny teeth from years of repeated use. O'Grady later compared it to an Ice Age Swiss Army knife. But the position of that tool was what mattered most. It was buried about 10 centimeters below the animal remains, meaning it had been left there even earlier. When the camel teeth were tested, 2 independent analyses returned nearly identical dates, around 21,000 to 22,000 years old. The tool itself also looked nothing like a Clovis point. Instead, it belonged to what archaeologists call the Western stemmed tradition, a completely different style of tool-making that may have belonged to an entirely different group of people. By now, the Clovis timeline wasn't just being questioned, it was beginning to fall apart from every direction. Then researchers found something even harder to dismiss than stone tools or ancient campfires: footprints, frozen in time, left by people who walked beside some of the largest animals that ever lived. Footprints frozen in time. In 2009, researchers walking across the white gypsum desert of White Sands National Park in southern New Mexico noticed something unusual beneath their feet. Hidden in the dry lake bed were what locals sometimes call ghost tracks, footprints that only become visible when the moisture and sunlight are just right. But 21,000 years ago, this wasn't a desert at all. It was the muddy shoreline of a huge Ice Age lake called Lake Otero, surrounded by plants and filled with wildlife. Researchers have uncovered 61 human footprints in this site. Some belonged to adults. Others were so small they could only have been left by children. They weren't standing in one place. They were walking, running, crossing the shoreline, living ordinary lives on a day that somehow survived for thousands of years. The reason they survived was almost unbelievable. The footprints were pressed into soft mud beside the lake. Before water could wash them away, the desert sun baked the mud hard. Later, blowing gypsum sand slowly covered and protected them, sealing them underground until the modern desert finally revealed them again. Then came the question everyone wanted answered. How old were they? In 2021, scientists first dated ancient seeds buried in the same layers as the footprints. The results pointed to an astonishing 21,000 to 23,000 years ago. Critics argued the seeds might have absorbed old carbon from groundwater, making them seem older than they really were. So the team tested the site again using ancient pollen, which gets its carbon directly from the atmosphere, avoiding that problem completely. The dates matched. A third independent dating method reached the same conclusion. 3 different dating methods, 3 independent results. One conclusion. The tracks became even more remarkable when researchers realized they crossed the same ground as Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths. In one area, a human footprint was preserved inside the track of a mammoth, showing they had walked the same path within a remarkably short time of each other. If those dates are right, people were already living in North America when giant ice sheets still blocked the traditional land route from Siberia. By now, one discovery after another was pushing the timeline further into the past. But the most controversial claim in the history of American archaeology was still waiting. Because compared to what came next, even 23,000 years would suddenly seem surprisingly recent. The Mammoth Mystery. In 1992, a routine highway construction project near San Diego, California, came to an abrupt stop. Paleontologist Richard Cerruti was monitoring excavation work along State Route 54 when a backhoe struck something buried nearly 9 feet underground. It wasn't a rock. The bones belonged to a young American mastodon, a distant relative of modern elephants that lived in North America during the Ice Age. But almost immediately, Cerruti noticed something strange. The bones weren't scattered the way nature usually leaves them. The team halted construction and treated the site like a crime scene, carefully mapping every bone and stone before removing anything. Then, the real mystery began. Several of the mastodon's thick leg bones contained spiral fractures, a very specific type of break that forms when fresh, living bone is struck with tremendous force. Even more surprising, the heavy limb bones had been smashed open, while the much thinner ribs nearby were left almost untouched. If the damage had been caused by heavy machinery, shifting rocks, or natural pressure, the fragile bones should have broken first. But it didn't end there. Scattered among the remains were 5 large cobblestones that didn't belong in the surrounding soil. How did they reach America? Right now, there are 2 major theories that scientists use to answer this question. The first is the Pacific coastal migration. According to this idea, the earliest people didn't wait for an ice-free path through the middle of the continent. Instead, they may have traveled by small boats along the Pacific coastline, following one of the richest marine ecosystems on Earth, sometimes called the Kelp Highway. For a long time, many scientists argued that humans living so long ago simply couldn't build boats capable of such journeys. Then, one discovery changed that conversation. On the Greek island of Crete, archaeologists found stone tools at least 130,000 years old. That discovery mattered because Crete has been an island for more than 5 million years. It was never connected to Europe or Asia, even when sea levels were at their lowest. Whoever reached it had to cross open water intentionally, suggesting that ancient humans may have mastered sea travel far earlier than once believed. The second major theory is that the Americas were settled in multiple waves, not just one. That means different groups of people arrived at different times using different routes. Their findings suggest that one group may have traveled along the Pacific coast around 26,000 years ago, while another later crossed Beringia around 15,000 years ago. Many researchers believe this later migration became the people we know as the Clovis culture. So, in the end, neither of these theories answers every question, but they make one thing clear. The story of the first Americans is far more complicated than we once believed. Now, after hearing it all, which discovery in this video do you find the most convincing? And what do you think is still missing before this mystery can finally be solved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible science-based videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.